Hello, everyone. I've been working a lot of overtime, so I've been a little bit too tired to read more. But because of a computer glitch, I have to re-record the second section of Coraline, and because I hate repeating myself, I'm gonna read another chapter or two of Legend of Huma, and then switch back to Coraline and re-record that. So, Chapter 3. The two wanderers found it impossible to travel too far before being forced to rest. Huma's head still bothered him, and Kaz was not fully over the effects of the drugged food that he had been fed following his capture by the goblins. I was a fool. They caught me napping like a newborn and trussed me up good. I am many things, but not crazy enough to try rising to face two pikes that had me pinned to the ground. Even goblins can't miss at that range. That made Kaz laugh, although Huma found little humor in the statement. They finally agreed to stop at a small rise that would provide some protection. It was uncomfortably too much like the position that the first goblin patrol had chosen. Still, it was better than the wide open terrain. Huma only prayed that he would keep his eyes open long enough to wake the Minotaur when it was Kaz's turn to take watch. They talked a little while, perhaps because neither felt safe about sleep. Huma spoke of the knighthood and its basic beliefs and organization. Kaz found the Knights of Solamnia interesting. Many aspects of about it appealed to the Easterner, especially the great respect for honor. You have no honor. Kaz went into very little detail about his own people. They were great mariners, it was true, but their lives were now controlled by the ogres. They still had their tournaments of honor, where one rose in rank by defeating his opponent. But the ogres cared little for this method and chose new measures more appealing to their ways. Because of that, Kaz had already built up a great hatred of his so-called masters before his deadly clash with his captain. Anything was better than servitude to their kind, he felt. That Huma trusted Kaz with his life disturbed the Solamnian a little. He'd already seen how savage the Minotaur could become. Huma never could have snapped an opponent's neck with the efficiency and eagerness that Kaz had shown. Yet, he felt that the Minotaur could be trusted where his word was concerned. The debate in Huma's mind raged on until he fell prey to weariness. Then it became a moot point. The night passed without incident, as did the first hours of day. They ate what little rations Huma had left. A brief look in the goblins' bags had made the knight lose all desire for any food the creatures might have been carrying, and besides, the goblins' food might have been tampered with. The day was bleak. A chill wind was picking up, and Huma was thankful that he wore good, strong padding beneath his armor. Kaz, however, seemed unbothered by the cool weather. His race was one of explorers and mariners, as well as warriors, and the lands of his birth could get exceptionally cold in the dark months. The bare-chested foot soldier did not even wear boots. Had Huma walked as far in his bare feet, they would have been scarred, bleeding, and mangled. The lands here had been baked hard and rough by the past. About midday, Huma noticed the riders in the distance. The riders did not come in Huma and Kaz's direction, and soon the group was lost from sight. But Huma believed the Knights of Solamnia, and that meant odds were good that the column, or at least a portion of it, waited nearby. Kaz, on the other hand, was not so confident about the identities of the riders. Here, so close to the front, they could be anyone. True, they appeared to be humans, or perhaps elves, but they may have been among those who served Takesis. You have never seen the Black Guard, the Warlord's elite troops, nor the Renegades for that matter. The Minotaur had used that puzzling word before. Who are the Renegades? Huma asked. Sorcerers unschooled, mad mages. All of them, somehow or another, have escaped the notice of orders of magic. Not all are evil. It is said, though, that one with tremendous power has made a pact with the Dark Queen herself, and that she is so desperate for victory now that she has shunned her own black robes. Magic. Huma knew more about it than most of his comrades. He'd grown up with it. His best, his only friend had turned to sorcery. From the first, Magus had told Huma that someday he would be a great and powerful sorcerer, even as Huma leaned towards the knighthood that his mother had claimed was his birthright. Thinking of Magus made Huma think too much of his early years, times that, while cherished in some ways, had left him bitter and unsure. He'd not seen Magus in years, not since the day his friend had completed his studies and entered the tower for some sort of test that would decide his fate. On that very same day, Huma had made a decision of his own and set out to confront the Knights of Solamnia and petition for a place among them. Huma shook away the thoughts. As they continued walking, Kaz continually scanned the horizon, but he seemed a stranger to the terrain. At one point he turned and asked, "Are all of the human lands like this?" "You've never seen any of them?"
"Only the worst areas. Where else would the ogres put us? But in the worst positions. In our own way, we are more expendable to them than goblins. They trust neither of our races, but they know they can control the goblins."
Huma nodded his understanding. "There are still lands untouched by war, but they grow fewer each year. Where my home was is now a wasteland akin to this." With that came a rush of bitter memories. He forced himself to concentrate on the path ahead. The past was behind him.
The Minotaur's head snapped forward. "We have company of some sort."
The knight squinted. More than 36 figures, all human, headed in their general direction. Survivors of some village, he realized. Lost survivors, evidently, with 2 broken-down wagons hauled by animals half dead and led by men who looked no better. There were women, too, and even a couple of children. As they drew closer, he suddenly realized that most of them were gazing at his companion. What he could read in those gazes he did not care for at all. "We must be careful, Kaz."
"What, against this pathetic rabble? You needn't bother, I can take these all myself."
Kaz started to reach for the axe strapped to his back, but Huma caught his arm. "No, that's murder." The usually quick-reacting warrior hesitated. The mind of a Minotaur worked much differently from that of a man. Kaz saw a threat. There were more than enough men to take him down if he failed to react. His world did not accept compromise. One triumphed or died. Huma stood dumbfounded. He did not want to fight Kaz, but he could not very well allow the Minotaur to go tearing into the refugees. Though Kaz lowered his hand, the damage was already done. The villagers saw only a monster who had threatened them. They had already seen their homes destroyed and their friends and relatives killed. Frustrations at their helplessness had built higher and higher with no outlet. Now, a lone Minotaur who represented all that was evil, all of their suffering, stood in their path. Several men and women shuffled forwards, a ragged mob. They were pale and frightened, a suicidal fright. All they wanted was one chance to strike back before they had died. Huma was appalled at the sight. The group moved like living dead. Farm tools, knives, rope, and even various household items were clutched as weapons. Kaz stood his ground, but he gave Huma a quick glance.
"If they come a few steps closer, I will strike, no matter what you say. I will not stand and die at their hands."
The Minotaur's eyes glared blood red. Before long, he would act. Huma jumped in front of the mob, his sword raised in the air. "Stop! He means no harm!" It was a pathetic attempt, and the results were as he had feared. The murderous mob came to a halt, but only to decide what to do about the young knight barring their path. "Step aside!" one grizzled elder yelled. A cloth was tied over one eye, and a red stain on it indicated a recent wound. His skin was cracked, and his sparse hair clung to his head. "We want him! He's got to pay for what he's done!" "He's done nothing to you!" A woman, a little older than Huma, and apparently once pretty, spat at him. "He's one of them! What does it matter whether he was the one who killed my children? If he's not done it here, he's done it elsewhere!" It would have been futile to try to explain. They would not have listened to Huma, and, even if they did, it would not excuse the horrors that they had suffered. Kaz was their only focus. In desperation, Huma brandished his sword. There was some murmuring, and a few less hardy souls stepped back. But the apparent betrayal by a knight of Solamnia against his own race was more than some could stand. The mob moved forward again, but this time it was obvious that Huma was also their target. Behind him, he could hear his massive companion pulling out the axe.
"Have no fear, Huma. We will crush them."
There was no anticipation in those words, even more than the first time that Huma had noticed. There was anticipation in those words, even more than the first time Huma had noticed it. Not even the sight of an angered Minotaur clutching a huge battle axe in one great hand was enough to deter villagers. Thin, bony arms from which hung the rags of clothes rose. Some were empty-handed, and some were willing to strike with whatever was in them. Huma stepped back. Would he really kill these people to protect one who had been an enemy only a few days before? No knight would do so. Huma knew that, yet he could not leave Kaz to them. Kaz, you'd better run. They'll kill you now, Huma. Kill you for aiding me. Better we stand and fight. That was the last thing Huma desired, but there appeared to be no other choice. Either he moved aside and betrayed the Minotaur, or he stood and betrayed those he had sworn to defend. His sword wavered. A strong wind rushed up from behind him. The mob froze and all eyes stared upwards. Behind him, Huma heard Kaz whirl and curse. Dragon! A cloud of dust kicked up, obscuring Huma's vision as he turned. He could hear the flapping of great wings as the dragon evidently prepared to land. In his mind, he saw one of the deadly black dragons, perhaps a huge red one, come to strike them all down. His sword would be less than useless. But, even before the dust had settled, Kaz was charging the dragon. Of darkness or light, it mattered little to him. He had no future, whichever the case. He only hoped to do some damage before the Leviathan crushed him. The Minotaur shouted a battle cry as he ran, and the axe whirled about his head. Huma got his first glance at the dragon as Kaz struck. The knight raised a hand and shouted, although he knew it was too late already. No! The might of a Minotaur is truly impressive. It was said that an axe in a Minotaur's hand could split boulders in two. Had Kaz struck, it was quite possible that he might have conquered. Instead, he suddenly froze mid-swing, and his momentum, great as it was, threw him headfirst to the ground beneath the dragon's great maw. The dragon glanced only briefly at the fallen berserker, and then looked up to study the human. Huma stared back. As a knight, he was accustomed to the comings and goings of dragons of light. They served as guardians and messengers, but he had never seen one this close. It was tall and sleek. The entire body was silver save the two eyes that glowed like sunshine. He knew instinctively that the dragon was female, although he would have been hard-pressed to explain this reasoning. The jaws were longer than his arm, and the teeth were so long that the dragon easily could have bitten off Huma's head in one snap. The snout was long and tapered. The dragon's voice, contrary to the beast's appearance, was deep and melodious. A knight of Solamnia, what do you do out here? You are far from your comrades. Are you seeking this garbage here? Rest assured, the Minotaur will go nowhere, not while my power still holds him. Huma lowered his weapon. The villagers had melted into the background, although they were in no real danger. Are you well? The question seemed legitimate. The silvery dragon was actually concerned. Please, don't harm him. It's not what you think. The glimmering orbs of the dragon seemed to appraise him. The Leviathan was curious. Why do you wish to spare the life of this creature? Is there information you desire? I can wrench the information from him with little trouble. The dragon waited with the patience of one who measures time in centuries, not in minutes. He's my companion. He's turned from the evil of the Dark Queen. Had someone informed Huma that the face of a dragon was capable of revealing very human surprise, he would have scoffed. This, though, was the case. He remained silent as the dragon digested this unusual piece of information. The Minotaur would have struck me. It is obvious that he meant me great physical harm. How then can I justify your claims? Huma stiffened. You must take my word. I have no proof. She actually smiled at that. On a dragon, even a smile was fearsome. Lord Oswald had once said that a dragon's smile was like that of a fox who was preparing to eat the hen. I beg your pardon, Knight of Solamnia. I did not mean that I had no faith in your words. You must admit, it is not every day that one finds a Minotaur fighting side by side with one of your kind. No offense was taken. Well, what of them? Huma did not turn. He still remembered his indecision and what might have resulted. Their fear and anger is understandable. They have suffered much. I hold nothing against them. She acknowledged his answer with a sinuous twist of her narrow, lengthy neck. To the villagers, she said, You travel off course. Turn to the southwest. There are clerics of Mishakal who will care for your injured and give you food. Tell any others you meet on your way. She received no argument from them, something that Huma was quite thankful for. The dragon watched the refugees set out in the proper direction. Then she looked down at Kaz with near distaste. If I release this one, his well-being is your affair. I have as little love for his kind as those unfortunates do. Huma was hesitant. I cannot promise his reaction when you release him. He is quick to anger. It is a trait of Minotaurs. If they are not constantly killing one another in their contests of strength and rank, I think they would have overrun Ansalon long before this. She sighed, an action that forced Huma to close his eyes as hot air warmed his face. Very well. With those words said, the Minotaur suddenly leapt to life. He did not renew his attack, but rather paused some distance from the dragon and the knight, the axe ready in his hands. He eyed the dragon warily. She returned the gaze with something akin to disdain. You heard everything. It was no question, and the massive warrior's expression indicated to Huma and that Kaz had heard all too well. He still did not trust either of them, though. I heard. I'm not sure what to believe. I easily could have crushed you, Minotaur. The silver dragon lifted one massive claw as proof. Had either one of them felt the force behind it, there would have been little enough left to mourn. Kaz turned his gaze to Huma. You saved my life once, Knight Huma. It appears you have done so again, only this time with words. The Minotaur shook his head. I shall never be able to sufficiently repay the debt. Huma frowned. Debts again. I want nothing from you save peace. Will you put away the axe? The Minotaur straightened, took one last look at the hulking figure before him, and hesitantly returned the axe to its resting place. As I've said, I cannot go back. What is to become of me? The dragon snorted, sending small puffs of smoke floating. I have no interest in you. Huma is the one who should decide. Me? You've shown excellent judgment so far. Would that more of the earthbound races showed such common sense. There was no mockery in the dragon's tone. Huma felt oddly pleased by the compliment, coming as it did from a creature as regal as the silver dragon. He thought carefully for several moments, tossing about ideas that had half formed during the trek, and then turned to the Minotaur. We must join the column. If you truly wish to prove yourself to others than myself, you'll have to tell them what you know about the ogre's movements and make them believe you. Huma paused. You do know something of use to them, don't you? Kaz gave it a long thought, and then grunted. I know more than I should know. If you can convince them not to slay me out of hand, I will do as you say. Perhaps what help I can give you will hasten the day when my people are free once more. You'll have to give me the axe. The Minotaur let loose with a bellow of rage. I cannot go among them unarmed. It would be a loss of face. This is not our way. Huma's temper flared. You are not among your people, you're among mine. If you step among them armed with that well-worn axe, there will be no hope for compromise. At the very least, you'll become a prisoner. At the worst, you'll become dead. The dragon leveled a glittery stare at the Minotaur. The knight's assessment is quite accurate. You would do best to listen to him. Kaz snorted and snarled and called upon the names of some 6 or 7 prominent ancestors, but in the end he agreed to surrender his weapon to Huma when the time came. The silver dragon spread her great wings. She was a magnificent creature, the very aspect of power and beauty joined into one. Huma had seen tapestries, wood carvings, and sculptures in Vingard Keep that had sought to capture the essence of dragons. They were all pale specters when compared to the actual being. I was flying to rejoin my kin in northern Ergoth when I caught sight of you. The situation was unique. It interested me, so I decided to land, she said. I should move on, but it will not take me far out of my way if I transport the 2 of you to your destination. The thought of soaring through the sky on the back of one of the legendary dragons nearly overwhelmed Huma. He knew that there were knights who fought astride the huge beasts, and had even talked with them, but Huma had never been so privileged. How do we hold on? If I fly slowly, you should have no trouble hanging on with your arms and legs. Many have done it before. Although you are the first to fly with me, it will save you much time and hardship. She lowered her head so it was level with his own. Huma could fly. Mages had once said that this was one of the greatest reasons for joining the Orders of Sorcery, to float among the clouds. Huma straddled the long, sinewy neck just above the shoulders and could not help but smile at Dragon, who had turned to watch. He knew she understood his enthusiasm all too well. Reddening slightly, Huma reached down a hand to Kaz. The Minotaur stared at the offered hand and at the back of the dragon. He shook his head vehemently. My people are creatures of the land, sailors of the seas. We are not birds. It is perfectly safe. The dragon appeared slighted. A babe could ride with no fear. A babe would be foolish enough. I am not. There's nothing to fear, Kaz. Huma's remarks stung well, as the knight had hoped they would. If a mere human could face this challenge, then so could he, a minotaur. Snorting furiously, he took hold of Huma's hand and climbed up. He sat directly behind the knight and did not speak, although every muscle in his body tensed. He gripped the dragon's neck with his hands and legs. Are both of you prepared? Huma looked back at Kaz, who stared ahead without seeing. The knight turned back. As best as we can be, I guess. His heart was pounding, and he felt more like a small child than a knight of Solamnia. Will we fly high? The silver dragon actually laughed a deep, throaty chuckle. Not as high as you might like, but I do not think you will be disappointed. She gave the Minotaur one last amused glance, and then began to flap her wings. Huma watched in fascination as the ground fell away beneath them. Within seconds, the silver dragon was spiraling high in the sky. Huma lowered his visor to keep some of the wind out of his face. Kaz merely held on for dear life and changed neither method nor mind even when the silvery leviathan ceased climbing and finally maintained a slow and steady flight. Huma raised his visor and leaned as close to the dragon's head as was possible. This is fantastic! Perhaps you should have been a dragon yourself, she shouted back. If you could see the world as I see it. She did not try to explain, and Huma did not ask her to. For a brief time, the war, the knighthood, and all of his problems vanished. Huma settled back and absorbed the splendor. Chapter 4. The war was meant to be swift and final. Takhisis, Queen of Darkness, Dragon Queen, had set forth her children, her slaves, her warriors, her mages, and mystics in one great collective force. The focus of her attack was the Knights of Solamnia, for she saw in them the power and danger that the elves had once represented. The elves were now a shadow of their once mighty strength. Their self-exile from the outside world had sapped them of vigor. They could wait for her attention until the knighthood had been ground under. Yet the knights had their own allies and, most important, the discipline and organization that were sorely lacking from the Queen's followers. The knights also had dedicated their lives to her eternal foe, Paladin. It was said that Paladin himself had created the knighthood. Certainly, it was true that Venus Solamnus, the Argothian commander who had turned against the tyranny of his emperor, introduced the oath and measure by which his soldiers would abide, but it was always his claim that he had stumbled across a grove on far-off Sandcrest Isle, a place beyond the western shores of Ansalon itself, in which Paladin himself had awaited, with his twin sons, the gods Kirigolith and Habakkuk. Paladin had introduced Venus Solamnus to the creation of a powerful force for good. From Habakkuk came the Order of the Crown, which looked to loyalty as its greatest aspect. All new knights became members of this order, the better to learn to act in a concert, to aid one's comrades, and to follow faithfully the oath and the measure. From Kirigolith, god of just battle, came the Order of the Sword. Those who wished to could choose to enter this order once they had proven themselves as Knights of the Crown. Honor was first and foremost to a Knight of the Sword. No hand was to be raised in unjust anger, nor sword drawn because of personal jealousies. Last, of Paladin himself, had come the Order of the Rose. These were to be the elite, those knights who had so come to embrace the workings of Paladin that nothing mattered more. Wisdom and justice ruled their lives. From their ranks, most often would be chosen the Grand Master, he who would command the knighthood over all. Although it had never been so during the life of Venus Solamnus, the Order of the Rose became the Order of Royalty. Whereas all knights laid claim to royal blood, the Order of the Rose was open only to those of the purest blood. No one ever defied this rule, although it went against all the teachings of Paladin. The war had settled down to the most horrible stalemate. Men, dragons, ogres, goblins, the casualties mounted, the carrion creatures fed, the plagues began. I had not believed, the silver dragon's voice trailed off. Huma had not realized how quickly the destruction would spread across yet another once unspoiled region. Below them, frighteningly real, lay the evidence. Whole groves of ancient proud trees had been thrown free from the earth, either by dragons or magic users. Fields were no more than great mounds of upturned soil with the tracks of many feet trampled into them. The dead reposed in great numbers, knights and ogres both, although there did seem to be more of the latter, or was it merely blind hope on the part of the Solamnic knight? Huma's face paled. He looked at the dead scattered about, and then covered his eyes while he regained his composure.
A futile struggle here,
Kaz was shouting in his ear. The Minotaur had lost his fear of flight in his great interest in the battle.
Cronus picks, and the knighthood's commanders return the favor with little bites of their own. Neither will gain from this.
The words made Huma stiffen. Kaz could not help his nature. A battle was a study in skill and position to him. Even personally involved, he would ponder strategy and tactics, even as his axe screamed through the air. The silver dragon turned her head towards them. Obviously, we cannot land here. Kyre is certainly lost. To both sides, it would seem. These fields of wheat will feed no one. Huma blinked. There is hope, then. The supply lines of the ogres must be strained. The knighthood sits more securely with its. Yes, but their strength is not as great as their...
But their strength is not as great as that of ogres, interjected the Minotaur.
So intent were they on the desolation below that none of them had noticed the larger dark forms riding towards the general position. It was Kaz who spotted them. He suddenly gripped Huma's shoulder tightly. Huma turned his head and followed the Minotaur's gaze. "Dragon!" he shouted to the silver leviathan bearing them. 6 at least! As they neared, Huma began to make out more definite shapes and colors. Reds, led by a black dragon. Squinting, Huma realized it was true, an enormous black dragon, bearing a rider, as they all were. "I cannot fight them all," said the silver dragon. "Jump when the earth is close. I will attempt to lead them astray." The silver dragon skimmed down near the trees, trying to locate some place suitable to land before her deadly counterparts reached them. "You must jump when I say so. Are you ready?"
It galls me to flee from any battle, even among the clouds. Is there no way we can help, Huma?
Huma kept his face turned away from the Minotaur. "No, we'd best jump."
"As you wish."
They passed over what had once been a farmhouse. It was now a little more than a low, crumbling wall of bricks forming a crude rectangle. Beyond that, though, was a clear field. "I'm slowing. Ready yourselves." They poised. "Now!" Kaz moved first. He toppled over as if struck in the chest by an arrow. The silver dragon's talons fairly touched the earth as she glided into another turn. Huma leaned to jump, and he hesitated. "What are you doing?" the silver dragon screamed at Huma as the 6 dragons drew nearer. "You cannot fight them alone." "Don't be a fool. It's too late," he shouted quickly. Which could also be read a different way of, "Don't be a fool. Too late." Each of the dragons carried a tall, sinister figure clad in unadorned ebony armor. Their faces were hidden by visored helmets. Whether they were human or ogre or something else was beyond Huma's ken. The rider of the tremendous black dragon, a hulking figure who dwarfed Huma, motioned to the others. The Reds pulled back to await the outcome. The black dragon shrieked eagerly as the rider prodded it. The 2 dragons closed in with much bellowing. Claws slashed and one talon dug into the forearm of the silver dragon. She, in turn, raked the open chest of the black, leaving a great gash marks across it. The armored rider swung a wicked 2-headed axe, and Huma automatically dodged the attack. As the 2 dragons grappled, Huma was able to angle close enough to strike back. The other riders hung back in nervous anticipation. Their dragons shrieked angrily at being unable to participate. Then the silver dragon caught the black across the wing with her claws, and the other shrieked in pain. The black rider was thrown to one side and left open to Huma's thrust. Without thinking, the knight struck at the opening below the opponent's shoulder. The point easily cut through the thin mail, and momentum carried it deeper. The rider grunted and slumped forwards. A chorus of cries from the riders and dragons alerted the black to the injury of its charge. With frenzied movements, the black one tore away from the silver dragon. Huma readied himself for the mass attack that would surely follow, but oddly enough, the enemy did not press its advantage. The remaining dragons formed a protective circle around the black dragon and its badly wounded rider. And then, all 6 beasts turned in the direction from which they had come. While Knight and Silver Dragon watched in stupefaction, the enemy flew away. Huma found himself breathing calmly again. Below him, the Silver Dragon also had regained her poise. Her wounds still bled, and Huma wondered just how severe were the injuries. As if in response, she turned to look at him, concern obvious in her every movement. "Are you injured?" "No. What of you? Do you require aid?" How did one treat a dragon? "I don't know if I can help, but I can try." She shook her glittering head. "I can heal myself. I merely require a rest. What concerns me more is the odd circumstances of this battle. This was more than merely a patrol. I cannot put my mind to the answer, but I believe this is a sign." Huma nodded. "We must pick up Kaz and hurry to Lord Oswald. He will want to know all." The silver dragon edged downwards and saw something that made her smile cynically. She said, "It appears we have more visitors, ones who, I believe, will not be pleased to discover a minotaur in their midst." Following her glare, Huma saw them, knights of Solamnia, more than 20, he estimated. A patrol of his own colors, the silver dragon was right. The knights would be likely to run Kaz down, at the cost of a few of their own lives, no doubt. Kaz, hidden in the wreckage of a farmer's wagon and oblivious to the riders coming from behind, rose to wave at Huma and the silver dragon. Even if the knights had failed to see the minotaur, they could not miss the landing of the dragon. One knight spotted the bull-headed creature and yelled out a warning to the others. Immediately the patrol went into full charge. The minotaur whirled at the thundering sound and stood momentarily poised. Then the battle axe, which Huma had allowed Kaz to keep, was suddenly out and swinging expectantly. Swords were raised and lances aimed. Huma could think of only one thing to do. He shouted out his plan to the silver dragon. The oncoming warriors looked up in astonishment, and their orderly riding became haphazard as they suddenly momentarily forgot all else at the sight of the magnificent denizen of the air. The silver dragon came down behind Kaz and was able to grab the minotaur by his shoulders. Kaz let out a startled cry and dropped his axe as the great talons applied pressure to both shoulders and hauled him off the ground. The knights tugged hard on the reins, desperately trying to halt their steeds, while cheering for what they thought was the end of a marauding minotaur. Kaz continued a stream of curses that would have made the worst brigand blanch, but he was powerless in the grip of the silver dragon. When they were some distance away, the silver dragon dropped the minotaur gently to the ground and landed nearby. Huma leapt off her back and immediately confronted Kaz. If not for the minotaur's oath to serve him, Huma suspected he would have been slaughtered then and there. Fire glowed in the minotaur's deep-set eyes, and he snorted contemptuously continuously with anger. "No fighting! No fighting!" Huma ordered. "They will kill me. At least let me fight to the death, not stand there like some ineffectual gully dwarf." Very quietly and with cold anger that surprised him, Huma repeated himself. "I said, no fighting." The minotaur exhaled sharply and seemed to slump. He stared at Huma. "As you wish. I will put my faith in you who have saved my life. Twice." "That again?" Huma let out an exasperated breath and turned as the reorganized patrol rode hesitantly up to the awed trio. The patrol leader, the only one seemingly unaffected by the sight of a great dragon, called a halt and then leaned forward to study the young knight. It seems Bennett is not rid of you after all, Huma." Belated recognition dawned on Huma. "Renard!" Renard raised his visor. Some of the other knights shifted uncomfortably. Renard's face was deathly pale, and when he spoke it was almost as if his features did not move. He might have been a handsome man, but that handsomeness had been ruined by near death in his youth from plague. His face was gaunt and lined, and some of his detractors liked to joke that Renard had in fact died of the disease and just never realized it. Such colorful comments were never spoken in his presence, though few knights were his match. Huma was pleased to see Renard. The older knight had taken Huma under his wing from the first, when he came to Vingard to present his petition for entry into the knighthood. Renard had supported him when others had urged that he be rejected, a boy who could only claim his father was a knight, and whose mother could give no evidence to support him. The knights had gotten over their awe of the dragon by this time, and now all eyed Kaz. There was a great amount of muttering, much of it concerning what so strange a being as a minotaur was doing here. Renard beckoned to one of the other riders. "Bind the minotaur. I'm sure the Lord Oswald will be most interested in him, and what he is doing this far from the action." Kaz stepped back, fists raised. "Try. The first who lays a hand on me will never do so again." One of the knights drew a sword. "Insolent beast! You won't live long enough!" "No!" Huma stepped up to Renard. "He's no enemy. He was running from the ogres. I found him a prisoner of goblins and rescued him. He killed an ogre in order to save human lives." Several of the men made snide comments about the gullibility of the young knight, and Huma knew his face glared crimson. Kaz snorted. The slur on Huma's honor was as much a slur on his own, since he owed a life debt to the human. "This is the honor of the Knights of Solamnia? This is how they treat one of their own? Perhaps I was mistaken to believe the knighthood might be as honorable as my own race." The knight who had drawn his sword began urging his horse forward. "I'll have your head, Minotaur." "You will do nothing of the sort, Knight Conrad." The angered knight tried to face Renard down, but, as had happened countless times before, it was the pale knight who was victorious. No one could face the ice-blue eyes. "In truth, there is nothing any of you could say against Huma's ability to judge," continued Renard, "and you know it. Act like knights, not petty Ergothians or high mighty elves." The other warriors quieted, although it was clear that they were not pleased with being scolded like children. Renard did not care, Huma knew. Renard was concerned only with Renard. To Huma, he said, "The Minotaur is placed in your custody, Huma. I know more about their kind than these others apparently do. If he will pledge to come among us in peace, that will be all the assurances that I need." Huma looked at Kaz, who stared at the patrol in general and at the gaunt knight in particular. After some consideration, the Minotaur finally agreed. "I pledge to you that I will come in peace and that I will accept Huma's judgment in all matters." The last was a criticism of the knight's lack of faith in one of their own. The knights shifted uneasily. They did not like the idea of so powerful a prisoner riding loose among them. The silver dragon looked on with an expression of mild amusement. Renard's face was devoid of reaction, but Huma felt that he was amused by the remark. The patrol leader jabbed a thumb behind them. "We have a few extra horses, which we recovered about a mile from here. One of them is tall and strong enough to carry the Minotaur, I believe. When you're satisfied, I want the two of you up front. We have much to discuss, and you, Knight Huma, must have a rather interesting report." The other knights made room as Huma and Kaz stepped into their midst. There were 5 extra horses, 4 war horses, and 1 draft horse that apparently had been abandoned by its owner. The draft horse and the 2 of the war horses proved to be unfit for riding and had been taken along mainly for the meat on their bones. The tallest of the horses, and the only one capable of supporting the massive form of the Minotaur, was skittish, but not so much that Kaz could not control him. Huma found a grayish-silver steed and took an immediate liking to it. When they were mounted, they rejoined Renard. Huma scanned the desolation. What happened here? The lack of emotion only made Renard's words the more frightening. What usually happens, Huma? Mages fight their own private wars and tear up the lands, leaving nothing but rock and craters for those bound to the earth. Dragons burn or freeze or tear up the remaining fertile green regions. By the time the armies clash, there is little, if anything, worth fighting for. Mages were a sore subject with Renard. No one knew why. Huma had never mentioned Magius to him for fear of alienating him and losing one of Huma's rare champions. Did we lose? Stalemate. The fighting just moved north, though we were sent to assure that their northerly retreat was no feint. We were just about to turn back when we saw you. The silver dragon, who had stayed patiently silent all this time, finally interjected. Did you not see the dragon riders, then? Renard's head snapped up, and the other knights stiffened. Dragon riders, did you say? 6 of them, all clad in black and all riding red dragons, save the leader, who rode a huge black dragon. They seemed to be searching until they noticed us. I tried to buy some time, but your fellow knight refused to leave me. He insisted on joining the battle. With most of the faces hidden by visors, Huma could not properly gauge the reaction of his comrades. Some few seemed to indicate approval with slight nods, while one was heard to mutter something about unnecessary foolhardiness. Renard, meanwhile, seemed preoccupied. A huge black, you say? The largest. Young, though, the rider chose to fight us one-on-one. We did, and then a strange thing occurred. Huma wounded him severely, and the black was forced to retreat from the battle. Rather than seeking revenge, the others joined the black to seek help for their crippled leader. They would have slaughtered us all if they had come at us all at once. I still do not understand. Renard's face remained typically blank. How much this disturbed him was impossible to say. When he spoke next, it was as if the tale of the attack had already slipped his mind. I can only thank you for the service that you have given one of our own. Will you be joining us? I am unfamiliar with the healing of dragon wounds, but if the powers of a cleric of Mishakal will help, there are a few with the main force. The great beast flexed her wings, which unnerved more than one knight and many of the horses, and declined his offer. My own talents will suffice. I merely need rest. I will rejoin my kin. You might possibly see me afterwards. The last comment was directed more at Huma than Renard. It has been fascinating to know you even this brief time, Knight Huma, the dragon continued. Good tidings to you. May Paladin watch over you. Without further ado, the silver dragon lifted herself high into the air. Huma and the others were forced to look away as the dust rose. It had all settled at last. The astonishing creature was already far away. The group watched her vanish into the clouds, still awed by her presence. Renard turned and took stock of those under his command, including Huma and Kaz, and turned his horse. He gave no command, and none was expected. The others simply followed, the 2 newcomers riding just behind the patrol leader. It was not until they were well on their way that Renard motioned to the 2 to ride beside him. He continued to watch the path ahead as he spoke. These riders, have you ever seen or heard of them before, Huma? Should I have? Perhaps. Minotaur. My name is Kaz. He appeared tired of being addressed as if he were not quite there. Kaz, then. Surely you must know them. They are the Blackguard. One of many of their names. They serve the renegade mage Galandrakos and the Queen's warlord Crinus. What of the warlord himself? He is a giant, although whether an ogre or a human or something else, only a few seem to know. He is a master strategist who is willing to take chances even with himself. His favorite mount... The Minotaur stopped speaking, and his eyes widened. A thin, deadly smile spread across Renard's face, a frightening sight on that death-like visage. Renard turned to Huma. What I believe he was going to add was that the favored mount of Crinus is a huge black dragon named Char. Both man and beast are obsessive risk-takers, and one-on-one combat is something that they relish greatly. And I fought against him. The realization shook Huma. He had faced Crinus himself and lived. And then he suddenly thought, so had the warlord. He had been badly wounded, true, but Huma was sure that he lived. And somehow, Huma knew that the warlord would seek him out, to regain face, to regain honor, to more than balance the score, to kill him. I understand the warlord takes his battles very personally, Renard added, almost casually. Then he suddenly urged his horse to a quicker pace, and the others followed suit as quickly as they were able. Even then, they did not move fast enough to suit Huma, who suddenly watched the sky nervously. There we go. So, it is 9:22. So I'm going to go ahead and read some Coraline for everybody. But like I like I said in the last couple of videos, it's really, really frightening times. So even before we knew what was going on, I had picked a book that was about being brave, and then I figured, you know what? It was a good idea to fall back on an old book that had taught me to be brave as a kid. So, do your best and get some rest and try to become somebody that you can be proud of. And if people can hate without reason, and God, it seems like there's so much of that lately, then I can love you for the same. So, be brave and get some rest.